Welcome to Globewise Entertainment, your home for the most shocking, rare, and untold stories from Hollywood's golden years. Today, we're diving into a wild chapter of movie history, 10 controversial sci-fi movies from the 1980s that Hollywood tried to ban. From outrageous special effects to scenes that pushed the limits of censorship, these films sparked outrage, debate, and in some cases, outright bans across the globe. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, make sure to hit that button right now so you never miss our deep dives into cinema's most fascinating hidden stories. And don't forget, after the countdown, let us know in the comments, which of these banned sci-fi movies do you think was the most shocking? 1. Videodrome, 1983. David Cronenberg's Videodrome wasn't just another 80s sci-fi flick. It was a full-blown cinematic nightmare that pushed the boundaries of what Hollywood was willing to show. Starring James Woods and rock icon Debbie Harry, the film explored the terrifying collision of technology, media, and the human body. The story follows Max Wren, a sleazy cable TV executive who discovers a mysterious broadcast signal called Videodrome. At first, it looks like underground torture porn, but soon, it becomes clear the signal isn't just entertainment. It's a mind control weapon that rewires reality itself. The deeper Max falls into this hallucinatory rabbit hole, the more disturbing his visions become: guns fusing into his body, videotapes sliding into a grotesque stomach slit, and flesh merging with machines. Audiences in 1983 weren't ready for this. Critics called it sick, perverse, and dangerously subversive. Censors around the world tried to cut its most shocking body horror scenes, while some theaters outright refused to screen it. In the UK, it landed on the infamous Video Nasties list, alongside banned horror films accused of corrupting youth. But behind the gore and surrealism was a chilling message. Videodrome predicted the rise of media addiction, reality-bending propaganda, and technology-consuming humanity. What once felt outrageous in 1983 now feels eerily prophetic in today's digital age. Though labeled a box office bomb at the time, Videodrome has since become a cult classic, celebrated as one of the boldest and most dangerous sci-fi films of the 80s. Cronenberg himself summed it up best with the film's haunting line, "Long live the new flesh." At Globewise Entertainment, we bring you the stories Hollywood tried to bury. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, because this is just the beginning of our dive into the most controversial sci-fi movies the 80s dared to create. 2. Turkey Shoot, 1982. The sci-fi dystopia that shook audiences. In 1982, Australian director Brian Trenchard-Smith unleashed a dystopian nightmare called Turkey Shoot, known internationally as Escape 2000. At first glance, it looked like another action-packed sci-fi thriller, but what unfolded on screen was something far more shocking. The movie takes place in a future where society is controlled by a brutal authoritarian regime. Anyone who dares to question authority is thrown into a re-education camp. But these camps weren't about reform, they were about survival. Prisoners are given one horrifying choice: be hunted for sport by the wealthy and powerful, or be executed outright. This shocking twist made Turkey Shoot feel like a blend of The Hunger Games and The Running Man, years before either existed. But while some praised it as a bold metaphor for government corruption and human cruelty, others were horrified by its graphic violence and dark imagery. The film's over-the-top political undertones made censors furious. It was banned, heavily censored, or cut down in several countries, including the UK, where it was labeled a video nasty. Even in the United States, distributors trimmed it to avoid an X rating. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, its controversial nature, Turkey Shoot became a cult classic. Today, it's remembered not just as an exploitation shocker, but as a daring sci-fi story that pushed boundaries at a time when Hollywood preferred to play safe. Some call it trash cinema, others call it a forgotten gem of the 80s. But one thing's certain, Turkey Shoot dared to show audiences a world where human lives were reduced to entertainment, and that uncomfortable truth may be why it was silenced. That was the wild story behind Turkey Shoot, one of the most banned and controversial sci-fi films of the 80s. What do you think? Was it exploitation, or was it a bold piece of social commentary? Tell us in the comments below. And if you love exploring the untold stories of Hollywood, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more. 3. Inseminoid, 1981. In the early 1980s, science fiction was booming. Alien, 1979, had redefined the genre, and countless studios rushed to cash in on its success. Among them was British director Norman J. Warren, who pushed the boundaries of sci-fi horror with his low-budget cult film Inseminoid, 1981, also known as Horror Planet. The story follows a group of interstellar archaeologists exploring a distant, desolate planet. What begins as a standard space mission turns into a terrifying nightmare when one of the female crew members, played by Judy Geeson, is brutally impregnated by a monstrous alien creature. The horrifying pregnancy transforms her into a violent, unpredictable force, murdering fellow crew members under the alien's control. Unlike other sci-fi horror films of the time, Inseminoid didn't just flirt with fear, it dove headfirst into themes, forced pregnancy, and body horror. These elements were so shocking for the era that the movie quickly became notorious. Why it was controversial and banned? The film's graphic depiction of alien impregnation and its heavy-handed use of exploitation tropes drew outrage from censors around the world. Critics accused it of being misogynistic, while religious groups condemned it as degenerate cinema. In the UK, it was heavily censored and ended up on the infamous Video Nasties list, a group of films banned or prosecuted during the 1980s moral panic. In countries like Australia and parts of Europe, the film was outright banned due to its disturbing and excessive gore. Even in the US, many theaters refused to screen it, branding it as too shocking for mainstream audiences. But despite its bans, the movie slowly developed a cult following. Fans of underground sci-fi horror saw it as a raw, daring attempt to explore fears of alien reproduction and human vulnerability in space. Today, Inseminoid remains a notorious example of how far 1980s exploitation cinema was willing to go to shock audiences. Inseminoid may not have reached box office glory, but its boldness carved it into sci-fi horror history. Even banned films can leave behind legacies, and this one proved that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't just aliens, but the taboos society isn't ready to face. 4. Xtro, 1982. When it comes to the most shocking sci-fi films of the 1980s, Xtro stands out like a nightmare you can't wake up from. Released in 1982, this low-budget British sci-fi horror wasn't just strange, it was downright disturbing. The story begins with a father mysteriously abducted by aliens, only to return years later in the most grotesque and terrifying way imaginable. What followed was a movie filled with surreal imagery, body horror, and scenes so bizarre they made audiences squirm. One infamous moment even showed an alien birth that critics at the time described as beyond disturbing. But here's the twist. While Hollywood was cranking out friendly alien stories like E.T., Xtro presented the exact opposite, aliens as horrifying, merciless beings. This clashed with the feel-good sci-fi wave of the time, making the movie feel almost like an insult to mainstream cinema. Because of its extreme imagery, graphic violence, and unsettling themes, Xtro was heavily censored in several countries and even outright banned in parts of Europe. In the UK, it became part of the notorious Video Nasties list, a group of films considered too dangerous or corrupting for public viewing. Yet despite the bans, the controversy only fueled curiosity, turning Xtro into a cult classic that die-hard sci-fi and horror fans still talk about today. In hindsight, Xtro wasn't just another sci-fi flick, it was a bold, terrifying rejection of Hollywood's sanitized alien stories. It shocked censors, divided critics, and cemented itself as one of the most infamous banned films of the 1980s. Love it or hate it, Xtro proved that sometimes the most controversial films are the ones that survive in pop culture history. But would you dare to watch it today? Let us know in the comments if you think Xtro was too extreme or just ahead of its time. 5. Contamination, 1980. In the early 1980s, Italian director Luigi Cozzi set out to ride the wave of success that Alien had left across cinemas worldwide. What he created was Contamination, 1980, a low-budget but unforgettable sci-fi horror film that shocked both audiences and censors. The story begins with a ghostly cargo ship drifting into New York Harbor. Inside, authorities discover strange green pods filled with a pulsating substance that looks harmless at first glance. But once disturbed, these pods explode with horrifying force, spraying a toxic liquid that causes human bodies to literally burst apart from the inside. It was gruesome, graphic, and for many, too much. The film's over-the-top gore scenes immediately caught the attention of censors in the United Kingdom, where Contamination was branded a video nasty under the infamous 1980s moral panic about violent VHS tapes. Banned outright for nearly a decade, it became a forbidden treasure for horror and sci-fi fans seeking the thrill of what they weren't supposed to see. Critics dismissed it as an Alien knockoff, but fans found it unique, blending Cold War paranoia, government conspiracies, and body horror shocks with an unforgettable goblin soundtrack that pulsed like a nightmare. The combination of extraterrestrial terror and government secrecy gave it a strange authenticity, as if this story of deadly alien contamination could really be happening in the shadows. Today, Contamination is remembered as more than just a banned movie. It's a cult classic that represents the rebellious spirit of 1980s sci-fi cinema, pushing boundaries, breaking rules, and proving that sometimes the films censored the hardest are the ones audiences remember the longest. 6. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, 1981. The sci-fi sequel too brutal for some countries. When Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior roared onto screens in 1981, it didn't just redefine post-apocalyptic cinema, it shocked audiences around the world. George Miller's sequel pushed the boundaries of science fiction with its gritty violence, anarchic desert wasteland, and adrenaline-fueled car chases that became legendary. But the film's raw brutality also sparked outrage, leading to censorship and outright bans. In countries like Sweden and New Zealand, the movie faced major restrictions for its unflinching depictions of savage gangs, disturbing violence, and a bleak portrayal of humanity's collapse. Censors argued it glorified lawlessness and was simply too intense for mainstream audiences of the time. Even in the US, critics debated whether the film's dystopian chaos went too far. Yet, the very elements that got Mad Max 2 banned are what turned it into a cult phenomenon. The movie elevated Mel Gibson into international stardom and influenced generations of sci-fi and action films. From video games to Hollywood blockbusters like The Hunger Games and Fury Road, its fingerprints are everywhere. Ironically, the controversy only fueled its success. What some governments tried to silence ended up becoming one of the most iconic sci-fi action films of the 1980s, a story of survival, rebellion, and the thin line between order and chaos. Today, The Road Warrior is celebrated as a masterpiece of dystopian cinema, proving that what is once banned can later be hailed as revolutionary. 7. Brazil, 1985. Hollywood's dystopian nightmare that almost got buried. In the mid-80s, when sci-fi was mostly about space battles and heroic adventures, one film dared to shine a harsh mirror on society's obsession with control, bureaucracy, and surveillance. That film was Brazil, 1985. Directed by visionary filmmaker Terry Gilliam. On the surface, it looked like a darkly satirical sci-fi set in a futuristic dystopia, filled with endless paperwork, malfunctioning machines, and a world where individuality is crushed by an all-powerful state. But beneath its surreal imagery, Brazil delivered a cutting critique of authoritarian governments, corporate greed, and censorship itself. And that's exactly why Hollywood panicked. When the studio executives at Universal Pictures saw Gilliam's original cut, they thought it was far too dark, too depressing, and, most importantly, too dangerous for audiences. Instead of celebrating his bold vision, they tried to ban Gilliam's version from release in the United States. The studio demanded a lighter, happier ending to make the film more marketable. But Gilliam fought back, launching one of Hollywood's most famous battles between a director and a studio. He even took out a full-page ad in a major newspaper, publicly asking Universal's head, "When are you going to release my movie, Mr. Sid Sheinberg?" The clash became legendary. For months, Brazil was essentially suppressed, censored, and hidden away, while critics and fans wondered if Gilliam's masterpiece would ever see the light of day. Eventually, thanks to pressure from critic circles and Gilliam's relentless fight, the original darker version was screened, and today Brazil is hailed as a cult sci-fi classic, often compared to 1984 for its terrifyingly accurate vision of a society trapped by its own systems. But in the 1980s, it wasn't just a movie, it was a movie Hollywood tried to erase. Brazil wasn't just banned, it was a warning. A film that dared to expose how control, censorship, and blind obedience could destroy humanity. And the fact Hollywood tried to bury it only makes its message more chilling. 8. The Thing, 1982. In 1982, John Carpenter unleashed The Thing, a film that would later become one of the most celebrated sci-fi horror masterpieces in cinema history. But at the time, Hollywood and critics weren't so kind. Based on John W. Campbell's novella Who Goes There, the story follows a group of scientists in Antarctica who encounter a terrifying alien parasite capable of imitating any living being. What made the film so controversial wasn't just its paranoia-driven storyline, but its shocking practical effects, oozing gore, body horror transformations, and grotesque alien mutations that pushed the limits of what audiences had ever seen on screen. Upon release, The Thing was slammed by critics. Some called it a nihilistic bloodbath, while others accused it of being too disturbing for mainstream cinema. In fact, Universal Pictures faced so much backlash that many theaters refused to screen it, and several countries restricted or outright banned the movie for its graphic. To make matters worse, E.T. the Extraterrestrial had released just weeks earlier, painting aliens as friendly and heartwarming. Compared to Spielberg's family-friendly hit, Carpenter's grim vision was rejected as too dark, too violent, and un-American. The film bombed at the box office, nearly destroying Carpenter's career. But history had the final say. Over time, The Thing rose from controversy to cult status, with fans and filmmakers praising its groundbreaking atmosphere and haunting ending. What was once banned and hated is now hailed as one of the greatest sci-fi horror films ever made. Globewise Entertainment outro line for this segment. And that's how The Thing went from Hollywood's most hated alien to one of sci-fi horror's greatest legends. Sometimes, the movies they try to bury end up becoming immortal. 9. Scanners, 1981. In the early 80s, David Cronenberg was already making a name for himself as the master of body horror, but Scanners took his reputation to shocking new heights. Released in 1981, this Canadian sci-fi thriller didn't just give audiences a chilling vision of psychic warfare. It gave them one of the most infamous scenes in cinematic history. The plot follows individuals with terrifying telepathic and telekinetic powers, known as scanners, who can infiltrate minds, control bodies, and even cause flesh to rip apart from the inside. But what really cemented Scanners in movie history was its now legendary head explosion scene. During a psychic duel, a man's skull violently bursts open on screen, leaving viewers horrified and mesmerized at the same time. Hollywood studios and censors panicked. The special effects were so realistic that Scanners was slapped with bans and heavy cuts in several countries, including the UK during the height of the video nasties scandal. Even in the US, the film faced ratings battles, with many theaters refusing to screen it uncut. Yet, the controversy only fueled its cult status. What was once considered too grotesque for mainstream audiences became a badge of honor for sci-fi and horror fans. Cronenberg's mix of government conspiracy, mind control, and shocking gore gave the film an edge that felt both futuristic and disturbingly real. Today, Scanners is remembered not just for its controversy, but as a bold piece of sci-fi cinema that pushed the boundaries of special effects and storytelling. The movie proved that sometimes being banned is the best form of publicity, because decades later, everyone still remembers the film where the guy's head blew up. 10. Galaxy of Terror, 1981. In 1981, Roger Corman, the king of low-budget cult films, delivered one of the most shocking sci-fi horrors of the decade, Galaxy of Terror. On the surface, it looked like another alien knockoff. A crew lands on a distant planet, only to face deadly forces beyond their control. But what made it infamous was the way it pushed the boundaries of violence, gore, and sexual horror further than audiences, or Hollywood censors, were ready for. The film featured disturbing imagery of alien parasites, dismemberment, and nightmarish hallucinations. But the real controversy came from one scene that critics and moral groups blasted as exploitative and degrading, a sequence so graphic it was heavily cut or outright banned in several countries, including the UK during its Video Nasties panic. Ironically, despite its reputation, Galaxy of Terror was also a launchpad for Hollywood talent. The film's production team included a young James Cameron, who worked on the set design and special effects, skills he later perfected in The Terminator and Aliens. Today, Galaxy of Terror is remembered as both a cult gem and a cautionary tale, a film that dared to go too far, mixing sci-fi spectacle with psychological and sexual horror in ways that were simply too controversial for the early 80s. While it was banned and censored worldwide, fans of retro sci-fi still hail it as a bold experiment that paved the way for darker, riskier visions in cinema. And there you have it, 10 of the most controversial 80s sci-fi movies that Hollywood didn't want you to see. These films may have been banned, censored, or buried, but they still left their mark on cinema history and continue to spark debate even today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more hidden Hollywood stories, rare movie histories, and countdowns that bring the past back to life. Now it's your turn. Which of these banned sci-fi movies shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. Until next time, this is Globewise Entertainment, bringing Hollywood's secrets straight to you.